Welcome back, friends and family, to another episode of the Backdoor Cut Show brought to you by the Barn Burner Podcast Network. I am Zach. You can find me on Twitter at BarnBurnerBro. And tonight we have a guest with us, Jackson Frank, writing at a lot of different places, a Step Back, Dime, Up Rocks, Liberty Ballers, and also owner of his own Patreon page where he does breakdowns on NBA draft prospects. Jackson, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Last week, you wrote an article that, as a Grizzlies fan, it was a pleasure to read, of course. You talked a lot about some of the moves that Zach Kleiman has done over the past year or so that he's been kind of running the basketball operations for the Grizzlies. A lot of the darlings that he's added to the team, some sneaky moves that he's done, kind of dating back even to Brandon Clark. I know you said you had him pretty high on your board. What are some things that you expect to see from him this year after a really efficient rookie season where, he was one of the better performing rookies, really a steal in the draft, I think a lot would say last year. What are you looking for from him this season?
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if he can handle a little bigger workload to an extent and see if he can maintain that really impressive efficiency. And then I'm also curious where exactly he lands as a shooter from deep. Obviously that was one of the things that a lot of people that were fans of his pre-draft had confidence in, despite the kind of the ugly numbers and some of the form. And obviously, I think he shot about 36% this year on not super high volume, but was also solid from the free throw line. So I'd be curious to see if maybe he could take a leap as a shooter, not necessarily in efficiency, just higher volume. So that'd be kind of what I'm curious. And then if he can continue to kind of improve as a rim protector and add some strength, I thought, he was a pretty solid kind of secondary help side rim protector, but there were some times where his kind of lack of strength for a four or even small ball five really hindered him at times because he just doesn't quite have that bulk and that strength. He could get pushed from the basket sometimes. So that would be kind of where I'm most curious to see if he can take strides. But I just think he slots in really well. He's a nice complementary player, which is about kind of building on some of the skills he's already shown and really taking another step forward to maybe become a starting level player more than just kind of a role player like he was last year.
Yeah, and I think that he could get that opportunity with Jaren Jackson Jr. going to be out to start the season. Taylor Jenkins may decide to throw Brandon Clark in there. Sample size was pretty small last year in games that he started. He didn't perform super well. Didn't translate the type of numbers that he had coming off the bench where he was very good. But I think as, kind of that first round pick, Memphis would like for him to be a starting caliber player. So hopefully we'll get to see some of that this year, and hopefully he is making those strides that we're looking to see. Let's talk about some more guys that Zach Kleiman has kind of craftily added to the team. DeAnthony Melton, big guy. Memphis fans love him. He's a guy that just kind of our color commentator here on the regional network calls him Mr. Do Something. He's just everywhere, kind of wreaks havoc. Kind of the secondary ball handler on our bench unit. Jack of all trades, kind of doing a lot of different stuff out there, helping the team. Just signed a new contract with the Grizzlies and really looking to make an impact. What do you think of his game?
Yeah, I think that was a really savvy pickup last offseason. I think long term, the hope with him should be to kind of grow into that complementary guard next to Ja. I know they're both a little undersized, but Milton is a really good plus wingspan. I don't remember exactly what it is, but he's definitely someone who can guard up a little bit. So this year, you've got to hope that eventually he can become a good shooter. He really seemed to kind of streamline his mechanics in that year that he didn't play. He was in college for 2 years at USC, but only played one of them. I think there was an FBI investigation that sidelined him for the entirety of his sophomore year. So really took strides there with his jumper mechanics. Because I think that's long term going to be how he kind of maybe outplays the steal that he just signed, as if he can become a nice complementary floor spacer, because he already has the other tools to be a really useful guard next to Ja. He's a really good decision maker, just sound and keeping the offense humming. Whereas Ja obviously is an incredible passer and a lot more daring and embracing of risk, which is what he should be. But at the same time, you need need someone who's a little more risk averse next to him. And then obviously Melton's a very, very good on-ball defender for a guard. Can play up. Is really good at creating turnovers. Is really good at that kind of poke from behind steal, even if guys get behind him or in front of them, excuse me. And kind of creating transition opportunities that way. But the big thing for me would just be to see if he can kind of finally become someone who stretches the floor from deep. Because I think he has all the other tools to be a really, really nice secondary guard next to Ja Morant.
I think one big thing that you mentioned there, his on-ball defense. One guy who is very dear to every Grizzlies fan's heart and has played a huge role in any success this franchise has had is Tony Allen, the grind father. So Grizzlies fans are always kind of searching for that next guy who can kind of embody him, that, you know, that gritty player who not afraid to get in the weeds and get the job done, and maybe not in the prettiest way. And I think fans may see a little bit of that in Melton, and that's one reason that everyone likes him so much here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, Tony Allen, just incredible defender, especially for a guy who was 6'4". The impact he's able to have on the perimeter and things he's able to do was incredible. So, yeah, I could definitely see why someone like Melton would resonate with Grizzlies fans after, you know, kind of shifting away from that grit and grind era. Someone who can kind of harken back to that ideology, one of the fan favorites from that era. I can definitely understand why Melton is someone fans gravitate toward, and people should gravitate toward him because he's already a good rotation player and only 22 years old. So you got to hope that he can kind of build and you know add compounding skills to become an even better player, and hopefully be in Memphis for a long time and kind of lead them back to another era where playoffs are the expectation and the result every year.
Yeah, if he could just shoot it all better than Tony Allen, that would just make the world a difference, I think, for us. Because it was very easy in the playoffs to game plan against Tony, just complete inability to hit from the outside. So hopefully Melton seems to have the promise that he will, you know, exceed Tony's ability in that arena. Also, if you can tell me more about a few guys that we've seen a little bit of. John Conchar, fans are already, you know, we have this like get jitty. I forget where it comes from, but he's already got his own kind of cult following fan Twitter account. And then another guy that Grizzlies fans have not seen take the floor at all and hasn't played basketball in a while, Jonte Porter. If you can kind of enlighten us a little bit on what those two guys bring to the table.
Yeah, so Jonte Porter especially is one guy that, you know, has just had a lot of bad injury luck. You know, he tore his ACL, I think, twice in the span of a year. But a really impressive passer for a big man, moves really well on the perimeter last time we saw him play. Smart team defender, good shooter, has an ability to both, you know, space the floor, but also attack off the catch, attack closeouts, and make passes based off that. So just a guy, if he's able to stay healthy and the injuries don't betray him, a really useful cog is someone who can space the floor, make quick decisions as a passer, switch a little bit. You know, I don't know exactly what his mobility is going to look like. It's so tough to know at this point. But the last time we did see him in college, he was really good and nimble mover for a big man and a smart defender. Conchar is just a guy who I don't want to use these, you know, he just seems to make things happen. But he does. He's an incredibly smart player, especially off the ball. Just knows where to be and how, you know, he's well positioned as an off-ball defender to get deflections or steals. And it's just a smart cutter, smart overall player, someone who, you know, I think fits in with this general vision that the Grizzlies have had under the new leadership of finding guys who can excel off the ball without the ball in their hands and just make an impact. And I think that's kind of what Conchar can do. And, you know, didn't play a ton last year, you know, about 200 minutes or so, but I think, you know, the hope would be that he can kind of continue to be one of those guys who is just someone who's a smart cutter, smart play finisher, can space the floor to an adequate degree, and also just someone who you can count on to be well positioned and play sound defense off the ball and occasionally force some turnovers and force some plays, because I think that he does have really nice team defense instincts. Something I always kind of popped watching him this past year. So just someone you can kind of slot in as maybe a smallish wing, but someone can play the 2 or the 3 occasionally.
I think hopefully he can fall into that category that Chris Vernon always talks about of guys that don't suck. Like if you just have a lot of guys on your roster that don't suck, that goes a really long way towards winning games when you can go deep on your bench when you're playing back-to-backs or on this particular schedule that Memphis and I'm sure most teams have coming up where they're playing essentially every other day. You're going to get worn down. Guys are going to get hurt. Just to be able to reach back into your lineup, bring those guys up, and not lose, not completely fall off a cliff. I think that hopefully will go a long way.
Yeah. I think in contrary, like I said, he's a guy who was a really good shooter in college, almost 42% across 4 years at Purdue Fort Wayne. Averaged 2 steals across 4 years. So just a guy that you can confidently, assuming he translates, well, there's a small school, but assuming he can translate to the NBA level, a guy you can expect to space the floor well and make things happen defensively, as I mentioned, and do so without dominating much usage, because I do think there is, kind of as you mentioned, value in guys who don't suck, because ideally you have your cornerstones
Right.
in Jaren Jackson and John Morant. So you just need good rotation players, good complementary starters. I think Contra is a guy who, 4 minutes this year, what you saw from him in college is a guy who can do that, who's not going to need to demand the ball ever, can still make an impact with his team defense and his floor spacing.
Yep, and let's talk a little bit about the guys that Memphis drafted this year. So went into draft night, didn't really know what to expect too much. Didn't have super high hopes, just had the one draft pick going in the second round. And then to come out with several guys who were high on a lot of people's boards without having to give up too much. Seems like, pretty sneaky moves by Kleiman. Took advantage of a couple situations, made a couple moves, and to also get Killian Tilly on that 2-way contract. What do you like most about Desmond Bane? That's a guy that Memphis fans are already gravitating to just through his social media, his attitude. He just seems to really be already on board with the culture that Kleiman and everyone's trying to build, kind of falling in place with the guys, with the young team that Memphis has. What do you like most about Desmond Bane to start with?
Yeah, Bane's a guy that I was really, really high on. I think I had him right around the end of my lottery in that kind of that mid-teens, 14 to 16 range. First off, obviously you have incredible shooter, and not just someone who maybe the numbers exaggerate how good he is. Like he shot off movement, he shot off the dribble, shot from well beyond the 3-point line, is awesome setting up screens with footwork. And I can't count how many times I, watching over his past few years where he would just completely leave defenders in the dust because he would fake using a screen one way and then dart back around the other one and get wide open jumpers. And so when I wrote about him maybe 7 months ago or 6 months ago, one of the things I talked about is, there are different ways you can create advantages offensively. Obviously, the easiest one is just beating your man off the dribble. Something you see obviously John Morant do a lot. But another one is, because Bane's an elite shooter, he's so good at using screens, and he gets open so much that you have to guard, like someone else has to get on him if he loses defender. So I like that a lot. I like the steps he took forward as a passer in his senior year. Became a really solid pick and roll player. So he's someone that I think you can, if you're not going to run the entire offense through Jaw, you can expect Bane to, be capable of running some pick and roll, especially got pretty good as a live dribble passer, hitting corners with skip passes and whatnot. And then just a really smart team defender too. It seems like everyone that I'm mentioning is a smart team defender, because it's true of these guys that the Grizzlies have brought in recently through the draft or 2-way contract, whatever, are just smart players who don't need to command the ball, and they also are able to, insulate maybe some of Ja's deficiencies. I know Jaren struggles this past year off the ball, being a little late with some rotations, and the Grizzlies seem to realize that they're bringing in guys who can make plays off the ball defensively, and that's something Bane does really well too, both on the interior and on the perimeter. So just a really well-rounded, high-level role player is really what you're getting with Desmond Bane. Elite shooter in a variety of ways, plays screens really well, can pass the ball well for his role. Isn't someone you're going to have to worry about defensively because he's strong, a little slow laterally too, which is just a really nice player who can slot in next to Jaren Jackson and John Morant and find a way to craft an impact.
And honestly, what Memphis has been needing for as long as I can remember is that knockdown 3-point shooter. Tried a multitude of people. Jaren Jackson might be one of the closest we've had to it since in the recent memory, at least. But to have a wing player who can do that, that just makes a lot of people happy. And I think, like you said, opens up a ton for Morant to create on the offense. And that's just a really big piece that Memphis has been needing. So for Kleiman to reach down, make that move up, trade up for the second year in a row to get a guy like that, an experienced guy who played 4 years in college. That kind of seems to be his MO for filling out the roster or getting some of those young veterans in, I guess you could say. Also, you got the star cornerstones who are younger, but also some guys with the 4 years of college to help provide a little bit of mentorship there. That seems to kind of be a strategy that he's utilizing. Another guy that played a few years in college, Xavier Tillman, Jaren Jackson's boy. I didn't realize until after the draft that they're like really boys. Jaren was best man in Tillman's wedding, so they're real close. And Killian Tilly also bros with Brandon Clark, played together. So a lot of former teammates playing together. Of course, we got half the Duke team on the roster as well right now. But what can Grizzlies fans expect from Tillman at the NBA level?
Yeah, so the big thing with him is, at least offensively, he's probably, him or Obi Toppin were the best passing big men in this class. And what makes him so good is he's an incredibly quick decision maker too. I think that's really important for role players is, when he sets a screen and he rolls the basket, he's not taking 4 seconds and then hitting the open corner shooter. It's really quick decisions. He's incredibly quick and snappy with his decisions. And then also offensively, he's like an incredible screener. I think sometimes that can go under. You don't want to overvalue that because you can learn the art of screen setting, but really, really incredible screener. I think Ja's going to love playing with him. Ja's going to have so much fun getting downhill off of Xavier Tillman's screens because he just eats up players with his strength and the way he sets screens, and he understands when to rescreen if the angle isn't correct. Is good about instinctively screening too. Even if there's not a pick and roll called, maybe he'll slip out to the wing and set a little flare screen for someone in the corner to free him up. And then defensively, a very timely and smart key defender, a really good post defender too. The Big Ten had a lot of really impressive post scorers this past year, and he basically demolished all of them at one point or another. Luka Garza is looking like the best player in college basketball right now. And Xavier Tillman just ate him up at times last year when Iowa and Michigan State played. His issue, though, is he doesn't really have any vertical explosion. He can't really jump quickly off the ground. And he has a good wingspan for a side. I think it's about 7'2" or 7'1.5", but a little undersized for a center. And then obviously the big question mark is, can he become a viable shooter from deep? I think he can. I wrote about him maybe a month ago or like a couple of days before the draft. And I think one of the things his issue is he has really, really prominent, like he bends his wrist back a little too far, I think. But I think that's a really correctable flaw that the right shooting coach can kind of work around or work with. But yeah, Xavier Tillman's a really, really good player. And I think, again, he fits in alongside these kind of ball-dominant cornerstones of Ja and Jaren. I'm just going to make life easier for those guys on both ends with his screen setting, his quick decision-making, and his high IQ passing. And then I think he's just a really sound team defender and someone you can rely on to again, get the job done and just make things happen and make life simpler on both ends for guys.
And I think we will get to see pretty quickly what, where he fits into the puzzle for Memphis. With Gorgie Jang on an expiring contract, you probably don't expect to see him on the team the entire year. You probably don't see him get that much run anyway, just because Memphis has other guys that they're going to be trying to add into the rotation and kind of see where they fit, whether it be Tillman or otherwise. And then see how guys can work around Valanciunas and have a backup for him on that second unit and see how he and Clark, kind of play together to start with. But I think it will be interesting to see that. And then also Killian Tilly. So that's a guy that, looking at on paper and some of the tape on him, I know he's had a lot of injury issues, but how excited or not excited, temper my expectations. What should we kind of see from him if he stays healthy, I guess, is the caveat.
Yeah, I mean, if he stays healthy, there's, I mean, no reason to temper expectations with him for the most part. I mean, obviously that's a big if, but he's a really, really good player when healthy. He's kind of he was basically, I think, the Jonte Porter of this draft in the sense that, if he's healthy, he's a top 10 guy, top 14 guy. Jonte's advantage was he's a lot younger than Tilly was when they entered the draft. But similar ideas there is if they're healthy, they should be able to provide impact. Tilly is one of the best, if not the best, shooting big man in this class. Shot over 40% for his career at Gonzaga. Really, really good pick and pop big man, especially like he's really good transition off of the screen to get to his spots as a floor spacer off of pick and pops. Can shoot a little off motion, not like someone you're running off of a bunch of screens like even Desmond Bain or Gabe Redick or Duncan Robinson, but someone, let's say you're running a pick and roll with Valanciunas and Ja and until he's on the weak side, he can kind of lift up pretty quickly and rotate to the wing and be someone who can get that shot off quickly. Doesn't really quick release too. Doesn't have to dip the ball. Some guys, when they cap, they have to dip it and then come up. He can shoot kind of from his chin to his neck level. And then he's a very good passer too. Not as good as Tillman or Toppin, but I think he's one of the best passing big men in this class. Really good in kind of working high-low actions, especially Gonzaga ran a lot of high-low stuff when he was awesome there. It was kind of a bummer that he was injured so much, especially his junior year, that we didn't really get to see him and Clark play together because they do fit really well conceivably. This really smart passer and shooter paired with a dominant lob threat in Clark. So hopefully you can get some minutes together with them. But yeah, and then defensively is a pretty good mover, someone you can switch on to. Has lost some of his perimeter mobility as his lower body injuries have kind of piled up in recent years, but still pretty good, especially for a big man. Smart team defender again too, especially on end here. Has really good, strong, quick hands, making plays happen, whether it's deflection, a block, or a steal. So yeah, I mean, if it sounds like he's a really good player, people listen to this because he is. He just has had a lot of troublesome injuries, whether it's ankle, knees, had a hip injury his sophomore year. So it's just a matter of him being able to stay healthy. Hopefully, an NBA training regimen can address some of his issues. But if he's healthy, he is someone who could return top 15, top 20 value in this class pretty comfortably.
Yeah, I think the pickup of him is a very low risk, high reward situation. So something for fans to be pretty excited about, especially with a lot of times the two-way guys, at least that we've had, have not really panned out to anything, or they're people you've never heard of. So to have not necessarily a household name, but someone who has that lottery talent type potential, on your roster is basically a freebie. That's a pretty nice thing to have.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Some teams use two ways for different reasons. I think it seems kind of weird to say, but the Grizzlies did, at least with Tilly, did use one on a very good basketball player who'd become part of the rotation. I don't think every franchise does that for one reason or another. But yeah, I think like you mentioned, low risk, high reward for sure, because he's someone who could be maybe a low end starter at best, and kind of his middling outcome if he stays healthy is just as a nice solid bench big man who can space the floor and make quick sound passes too, and isn't a liability defensively. And that's keep touching back to it, but that's kind of why I wrote that piece, because there's a clear connective theme with a lot of these young guys that the Grizzlies are accumulating. It's just they can work off of the franchise cornerstone, and they're smart on both ends, and have clearly definable skills that kind of slot in nicely next to John Jaren.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving a little bit towards the future. So Memphis, depending on who you ask, they're fighting or not fighting or contending for a playoff spot in the loaded West. So there's definitely a potential that Memphis could slide into the lottery this year, in next year's upcoming draft. Who are some guys that Memphis fans should kind of start keeping an eye on, whether college or overseas, that you're really watching? I know Cade Cunningham is a real big name. Jalen Green, some guys like that people are already very familiar with, but who are a few other guys that you would recommend keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so I think some of the top guys. Mentioned Cade, Jalen Green, Evan Mobley from USC is another big time player, center from USC. Jalen Suggs at Gonzaga. He's a point guard, kind of a combo guard. Another really good player. But I think if you're kind of looking at guys, maybe Memphis fans could kind of keep an eye on throughout the year that should be available, assuming they may be either in the mid teams or, kind of the late lottery if they miss the playoffs. Because I do think they have a chance to make the playoffs for sure. I don't think it's a lock, but I do think, kind of in that 11 to 16 range, 17 range where they'll probably end up. Guys I like because I think they still kind of need that bigger wing or that longer wing to slot in long term. Obviously, Melton and Desmond Bain, you'd hope can kind of maybe either one of them can be the two starting two next to Ja, but I don't think either one's someone you want playing the three in a very effective playoff. So someone like Moses Moody from Arkansas is a really nice player, really nice off-ball scorer. He's a really awesome shooter, really smart team defender, good length, good mobility at about 6'6". Just a really good off-ball scorer. He's decisive. He can space the floor really well. Pretty solid passer, attacking on the move. Just someone who, again, fits this theme of doesn't need a high usage offensively to forge an impact, but can really make the most of the touch he does get. And you're already seeing that in the few games he's played at Arkansas. Hasn't handled the ball a ton, but is playing pretty well because he's a smart and decisive player, whether it's, quickly shooting around the catch or attacking to get into the lane or finding an open man when he does attack. He's one guy. Another one is Keontae Johnson. He's a kind of he might maybe be more of a two guard, but he's a really, really strong and burly wing from Florida. Really, he's a pretty good floor spacer, really, really talented slasher and finisher. Quick vertical leaper, can finish at the rim well, pretty solid passer on the move. Maybe not, like I mentioned, maybe not quite a full-time three. I don't have his wingspan on the top of my head, but I think he's someone you can play there at times because of his strength and his ability to finish at the rim. Those are a couple of guys I think make sense. Someone like Josh Christopher, I don't necessarily know if he aligns with Memphis' vision, but he's a really talented scorer and tough shot maker. But he has some decision-making issues, and I don't think he's necessarily someone who would scale down well into a smaller role next to Jaren and Ja. But he's, like I said, a really talented scorer, has impressed as a tough shot maker, especially early in the year. But those are three wingers that I think could be available in kind of that mid lottery or that late lottery or mid-teen range where the Grizzlies will probably be drafted in June.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that. You can never get started too early. Last year, it was kind of like, do we want to spend a whole lot of time, watching these guys or not? Because we had that pick that ultimately ended up going to Boston. So it was kind of the 1 foot in, 1 foot out as far as, keeping a pulse on a lot of these college basketball players. But now that Memphis has all their draft picks, it's definitely something for fans to keep an eye on going forward this season. Thanks, Jackson, so much for joining us. Where can everyone find you? And also, got new work that you're working on that you need to plug?
So you can find me most of I'll always be posting clips on my Twitter at @Jack_JJF. In my bio, there are links to all the places I write for, including my Patreon, which you mentioned at the beginning of this show. I'm not working on anything draft related at the moment. I'll have a piece out about how I think John Wall fits with the Rockets, which is kind of pertinent to the Grizzlies, obviously, with the Rockets being in the same division. But I'll be putting out some scouting reports across every platform that I'm on throughout the year. My Patreon has some film breakdowns from a few guys early in the year. I've written about Cade Cunningham. I've written about Zaire Williams, who I didn't mention yet, but he's another really talented wing from Stanford who should go top 7 or 8. I've written about Jalen Suggs, so if you want to get kind of an encapsulation of kind of what their teams are, you can find that on Patreon. But yeah, if you're ever just kind of curious about guys, I'm always posting clips on my Twitter. But the platforms that are linked in my bio are always going to have stuff about the NBA draft and NBA in general from me throughout those 2 seasons and cycles.
Yeah, everyone, I highly recommend following Jackson on Twitter. Like you said, a lot of good clips, a lot of good analysis for these draft picks. Jackson, thanks again for joining us. And thanks, everyone, for listening to another episode of the Backdoor Cut Show. As a reminder, you can find us wherever podcasts are and on the Barn Burner Podcast Network feed and also the Backdoor Cut Show feed. Thanks, and have a good night.